Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you are having a wonderful day today. So, of course, very, very big news when it comes to this video, and of course, when it comes to boxing news and overall sports news in the world of sports today. And of course, that is that Mr. Canelo Alvarez, who, in my view, is debatably the best fighter within the whole entire world of boxing. And in my view, right now, is clearly the number one pound for pound fighter in all of boxing. Canelo Alvarez, apparently, in recent news, he has for certain, 100% now, it is now confirmed that he will be facing the WBA light heavyweight champion of the world, I believe, Mr. Dmitry Bivol. Now, of course, certain people's, reaction on this or opinions on this, it may be a little bit mixed. But of course, I'm going to give my own opinion and my own breakdown of this fight. Do I think overall that this is a bad fight? Do I think that Canelo should have maybe fought Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez instead, or maybe should have fought someone else? I'm going to give my opinion on it. Now, of course, if you've already seen some of my past videos, you probably already know my opinion on this fight anyway. But let me overall just break this down. But anyways, I believe all in all that this fight is now going to be confirmed for, or at least it is going to be trying, to be slated for that of May 7th. That is the confirmed date at the current moment in time, which of course does make sense. Canelo Alvarez likes to fight around those Mexican holidays, I believe, those Mexican weekends, which I believe, are within May and then also September. There's also rumors that maybe Canelo Alvarez is also going to face someone in December or maybe someone around that time. So more than likely the news that we're hearing, the first fight that he is going to have is against Dmitry Bivol. The second fight would be a trilogy against Gennady Golovkin. And a third fight is possible. Maybe he could face John Ryder, who just got a win over Danny Jacobs, or maybe Nolunga Makabu, someone of that sort. So Canelo Alvarez, he has a lot of options available at the current moment in time. He can pretty much fight almost anyone that he wants to. Let me break down the fights overall, and let me tell you, do I think they're good fights? Do I think they're bad fights? Let's get into it. Excuse me. Well, first of all, when it comes to the Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol fight, and I've said this a multitude of times, I believe that this fight is a mega fight. And I think all in all that this fight is a fantastic fight. Now, in terms of a monetary perspective, like I've already explained, and let me also explain this because there was a certain dude in my comment section where he asked me a question, but I don't think I quite understood it. I think I understood what he was trying to say, but his question at least just didn't make sense to me. He was trying to say, I think, that when it came to my videos that I was trying to play both sides or something like that. And, he's basically saying like, oh, well, which fights do you think overall are big fights? Well, what I'll say is this. I think that the Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez fights, if you're talking about in terms of a monetary perspective, if you're talking about in terms of money making and in terms of pay-per-view numbers, because those are American fighters, and Jamal Charlo is a black American fighter, and David Benavidez is a Mexican American fighter, I believe that more than likely that those fights probably would have done better on the numbers and done better in terms of pay-per-view. But I've already stated this a multitude of times. For those of us boxing purists, for those of us that really know about boxing and know overall what Dmitry Bivol is about, I always talk a little bit about Mikey Garcia here because, of course, there's a certain amount of narratives, especially by certain new media channels and LDBC channels. Let's just be real, because I don't like Canelo Alvarez. It just is what it is. Or the certain people that may spread certain narratives when it comes down to it, and the narratives that they spread about Canelo Alvarez is basically that, oh, he fights the weakest opponents and this and this and this and this. But Dmitry Bivol is not a weak opponent. If you want to talk about someone that, in my view, was slithering in and out of weight divisions, facing repeated weak opponents, fighters that clearly usually had no chance against that guy, it was usually someone like a Mikey Garcia. Because when Mikey Garcia, when he decided to move up from 135 and go to 140 and face Sergey Lipinets, a guy who pretty much had no chance against him whatsoever, no one really took a look at Sergey Lipinets and thought, you know what, this dude legitimately has a 50-50 chance against that of a Mikey Garcia. And that's why Mikey Garcia can't be compared on the same level as a Canelo Alvarez, because Mikey Garcia is a person that did not take a lot of the bigger fights in his career, and now he's already suffered a couple of losses, so he can't be remembered on the same level as a Canelo, or even as a Terence Crawford, or Vasily Lomachenko, or Alexander Usyk, or Tyson Fury, or Errol Spence Jr. He can't be remembered on their level. Because Mikey Garcia, at the end of the day, when you take a look at his resume, there's no definitive A-grade fighters there. None. It just is what it is. I don't think that Canelo Alvarez has a similar career. And when I take a look at this dude, Dmitry Bivol, and I've been stating this for a certain amount of months, and with my opinions, you're usually going to find consistency. I'm not a person that changes my energy very often. I'm not a person that backtracks when it comes down to it. A lot of these other channels, you can tell that the stuff that they say, they don't truly mean it. They don't truly believe in what they're saying. I'm not a person like that. Anything that you hear come out of my mouth, I usually pretty much 100% thoroughly believe it. That doesn't mean that everything I say, I think is just always 100% correct 100% of the time. But when I do say that I think that Dmitry Bivol is a better fight than what a Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez fight would be in terms of legacy and in terms of an actual challenge, I do truly believe that. That is truly what I mean. When I take a look at Dmitry Bivol, and when I've taken a look at him over the certain years, over the past several years, he's been on the rise over within the past several years. He's been very decently hyped up now for the past several years. You know, of course, a certain amount of people, they may make the point, well, Canelo, he's going on this Eastern European diet. Sure, you can say all in all that, you know, he's facing Eastern European fighters or European fighters, but a lot of these European fighters are very, very great fighters. Some of them are extraordinary fighters. And when I take a look at Dmitry Bivol, how many other fighters can we really say all in all within those weight classes to where if they were able to defeat Dmitry Bivol, how many of them would basically say that that's not a great win? If our to be Demetrius Bubble-Andre, Jamal Charlo, or, you know, Caleb Plant, or any one of these other fighters, David Benavidez, if any one of these other fighters ended up defeating someone of a Dmitry Bivol, it would be looked at as an A-grade win. It would be looked at as a colossal win. So Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, that's how you know that he is basically associated on the different level. Canelo Alvarez, in my view, like I said, he is a clear number one pound-for-pound fighter, and if he were to win this fight, I think that it would just nail in the coffin even more that he would still clearly be the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Dmitry Bivol, in my opinion, he's not necessarily someone that is a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. I don't think he necessarily has the resume for that, and of course, he's only won one official belt in his career, I believe, one of the official titles anyway. But he is a person that, in my view, if you wanted to maybe argue him top 15, top 20, you maybe could put him there. Because I think that Dmitry Bivol, you know, he is an extraordinarily skilled fighter. And Dmitry Bivol is not just a person that, he's not just a person overall to take lightly. He's a person that is extraordinarily skilled. He has very fast feet. He has very fast hands when it comes down to it. He has very good power from what I've heard from his sparring partners. Even David Benavidez, when he sparred Dmitry Bivol, he said that Dmitry Bivol punched just as hard as what a Gennady Trilogy Golovkin did. Now, we're going to talk about the Gennady Trilogy Golovkin trilogy here in a minute, and maybe who Canelo Alvarez could also possibly fight for a third time overall later on down the line, or, you know, for his third fight of this year. We'll talk about that here in a minute, and who I think more than likely he should go after. What I'll say is this. Like I said, I don't think that when you take a look at Dmitry Bivol, I don't think that it's as much of a sexy option, if you want to say that, in terms of overall, you know, the Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez fight. Because, of course, in terms of a monetary perspective, because those guys are American fighters, when it comes down to it, I think that more than likely they're going to do more money. But I think that Canelo Alvarez, I think that he does want to be in that conversation, not just overall as an all-time great fighter, because I think that he's already reached that pinnacle. I don't think that there's any question about it. But, you know, Canelo, he's not just a great fighter. He's an all-time great fighter. And I think that if you were to question that, I think all in all that I probably would have to question overall your boxing intelligence overall when it comes down to it, or overall your boxing agenda. But at the end of the day, Canelo is an all-time great fighter. And there's no doubt about that. With the things that he has accomplished, there is no doubt what level Canelo Alvarez is on. But the big question is, where is he going to be ranked at the end of his career? And that's why I think that Canelo Alvarez, at least at this current moment in time, I think that more than likely he's trying to get out of the way some of the light heavyweight fighters, maybe that Gennady Golovkin trilogy. Gennady Golovkin trilogy, in my view, I don't think that it's really a fight that, if you know boxing, that is going to be looked at as a super huge legacy fight, because I don't think that Gennady Golovkin is really at a good point in his career anymore. But what I will say is this. You know, I do review a certain amount of these channels like a Boxing Eagle or a Dante's Boxing Nation and yada, yada, yada. Pretty much these new media and LDBC channels. What I will say is this. If you're a person all in all that keeps the same energy, and if you believe that the Jamal Charlo and Gennady Golovkin fight would be a very interesting fight, even at Gennady's age, this point in time. Because what are these guys complaining about? Oh, Gennady Golovkin, he won't fight Demetrius Andrade, he won't fight Jamal Charlo. And I somewhat agree with that when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, if you're also going to state the same thing overall, that Gennady Golovkin is not that good of a fighter at this point in time in his career, then why would you want to see Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez or Demetrius Bubble-Andrade fight him? Basically, when it comes down to it. Why would you say that that's a big fight, but then Canelo's going to fight him at this point in time in his career, and then all of a sudden it's no longer a big fight? You know what I mean? But what I'll say is this, because my energy is usually pretty consistent and objective, I don't believe overall that Gennady Golovkin is the same fighter that he was a few years ago. I think that a few years ago, when Canelo and Gennady Golovkin had their little, you know, 2 fights, I think that those were probably some of the best fights that I've ever seen, especially that second fight. I thought that it was one of the most competitive matches, one of the closest matches that I've personally ever seen between 2 probably decently all-time great fighters. But I don't think that Gennady Golovkin is on that level anymore. I think that more than likely Gennady Golovkin, he probably is going to get stopped more than likely against Canelo Alvarez in the third fight. If he somehow ended up surviving and mustering up his energy, wouldn't be surprised, but I don't expect Gennady Golovkin to beat Canelo Alvarez in the third fight. I don't think he's anywhere near the same. He doesn't have the same coach. He doesn't look to have the same power. He doesn't overall look to have the same stamina. He doesn't look to have the same punch resistance. I somewhat get why the fight is happening, because DAZN really wanted that fight to happen. They believe that that fight is going to do extraordinary numbers. I don't personally believe that the fight is going to do extraordinary numbers, but what I will say is this. It could. It's not impossible, because if Gennady Golovkin somehow does look very impressive over Ryota Murata, which is not impossible because Ryota Murata, he's not really known for a big amount of boxing ability and craft. But at the end of the day, if Canelo actually were able to beat Gennady Golovkin, he would have defeated a unified champion, because for that fight to happen, he is going to have to get past a Japanese fighter, I believe, from Japan, Ryota Murata. So Canelo Alvarez, first of all, I think the Dmitry Bivol fight is an excellent one. I think that the Dmitry Bivol fight is a big legacy-defining fight. Dmitry Bivol, sure, people can go on this narrative and say, oh, he's Eastern European. Yeah, but some of these European or Caucasian fighters are not bad fighters at all. And when you take a look at Dmitry Bivol, he's a person that he can fuck you up overall, if you get him in there on the wrong night. Dmitry Bivol, he has exceptional skills and exceptional athleticism. This is a dude that I somewhat understood the criticisms of the last opponents, even though I still somewhat disagreed with the criticisms of Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant. A lot of people, of course, they said, oh, well, those guys have no punching power, yada, yada, yada. That somewhat to a degree is understandable. Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders have never really been known for their great A-grade punching power, but what they were known for overall is having, pretty decent feet, fast feet when it came down to it, slick head movement, slick boxing ability, and Canelo Alvarez was able to knock both of them out. So you have to give Canelo Alvarez still a lot of props for beating those guys, because I don't think it would be fair just to call those guys bums off the street, because they're not. They were guys that defended their belts. They were guys all in all. One of them was a multiple weight division champion in Billy Joe Saunders. Caleb Plant was, I believe, the IBF champion of that weight division. He defeated Jose Uzcategui, Caleb Truax. Not fighters that I would necessarily rank as A-plus fighters, but fighters that were good enough at one point in time in their career to win a belt. You know what I mean? So, like I said, Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, to me, they're not super duper high above a Jamal Charlo or maybe even a Demetrius Boo Andrade in my view. They're just not in terms of their accomplishments, and really not even that much farther in terms of skills. So it just is what it is. So when it comes down to it, like I said, Canelo, I think, has been facing a great amount of great competition for a very long time. And this Dmitry Bivol fight, Dmitry Bivol, out of the whole entire possibilities that Canelo could have fought next within his natural weight divisions, whether it be Andrade or whether it be Charlo, Benavidez, Beterbiev, this is probably the second most dangerous fight that I think that Canelo possibly could have took for next. It either would have been him or, Artur Beterbiev. Those are the only two fighters, I think, within a certain amount of weight classes from 160 to 175 that I would give a 50% chance over Canelo Alvarez. Those are the only two fighters, either Dmitry Bivol or Artur Beterbiev. And Dmitry Bivol is not a fighter, like I said, to mess around with. He's a person that has very fast hands, very fast feet, very good punching power, a decent chin. He's a person that has decent boxing IQ. He has a very good amateur pedigree, very good Olympic pedigree. He's had that championship, at that weight division for a very decently long time. This is not a person that is just going to be a warm-up. This is going to be a person to where if Canelo Alvarez truly is going to beat him, he's going to have to put on his A-grade. He's basically going to have to put on one of the best performances of his career, in my view, because if the best version of Dmitry Bivol shows up, Canelo could possibly be in trouble. This is a very big legacy-defining fight, in my opinion, and if somehow he is actually able to unify the 175-pound weight class within the next couple of years, I think that that's another all-time great achievement in his career. No matter what people want to say, Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, those are fighters that are all-time great at this point in time. Well, I'm not going to say all-time great. Let me not say that. But if Canelo were able to beat them, they would be all-time great achievements. I think that the Charlo and Benavidez fights are still great fights as well. I'm not saying that they're not. And those are big fights as well. They probably would be more popular options, of course, with fans. But for those of us that, of course, know boxing and know the type of trouble that Dmitry Bivol can bring opponents, and the size and the power and the speed and the footwork that he has, in that ring, Canelo is going to have to put on his A game in this fight when it comes down to it. It just is what it is. He's going to have to put on his A game. So that's pretty much enough for the Dmitry Bivol breakdown. But anyways, when it comes down to just to talk about the Gennady Golovkin trilogy a little bit more, Not the biggest fan of that fight when it comes down to it, but I understand why it's happening. I think the zone believes that, that fight's going to get a lot of numbers. They wanted that fight to happen in the first place. Gennady Golovkin, it looks like he's ready to cash out. I think that that's the last fight that he wants in his career. And if he ends up winning or losing that fight, more than likely losing that fight, he's probably going to retire. I think overall that more than likely is what's going to happen with Gennady Trilogy Golovkin, but we'll see what happens. And he'll end up at a decent point in his career, possibly winning over Ryoto Murata, becoming somewhat of a unified champion again within the middleweight division, fighting Canelo Alvarez, the current number one pound-for-pound fighter in most people's lists, including mine, and pretty much riding off into the sunset whether he wins or loses. So Gennady will be at a good point in his career. Then, of course, that leads to the conversation of who should Canelo Alvarez face afterwards. Should it be John Ryder? Should it be Ilunga Makabu? Should it be, who else? I doubt more than likely that it's going to be either David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo, because facing a Gennady Golovkin and Dmitry Bivol, those two fights, especially within a few months, that can be somewhat of a tall order, especially a Dmitry Bivol fight. That can be a very, very tall task if you don't play it carefully. So we'll see all in all what happens. More than likely, what I would want to see Canelo Alvarez do, I would like to see him face Ilunga Makabu. I would like to see him face that. Why would I like to see that fight? Because I was kind of cool with that fight happening from the beginning. And the reason why that was is because Ilunga Makabu, no, I don't think he's an A-grade fighter. And even after his last fight, to be honest with you, it's even a debate if he's a B-grade fighter. But he is decently bigger than Canelo. And at the end of the day, he's a decent cruiserweight when it comes down to it. If Canelo were able to win a belt in another weight class at cruiserweight, he'd be a 5-weight division champion. Not a lot of people would have looked at Canelo several years ago and said, hey, you know what, one day he's going to be a cruiserweight champion. No one would have thought that at one point in time. So if he were able to do that, it almost would somewhat be of a Roy Jones Jr. accomplishment. So I could see maybe where Canelo Alvarez is going there. And then maybe after that, maybe then he'll face Artur Beterbiev, then go after Jamal Charlo and Benavidez. Then he pretty much would have to go after those guys, in my view. Now, of course, if he decided to retire after that, he could retire as an all-time great. But in my view, if you're going to retire as a top 10 fighter of all time, I do think that eventually you're going to have to add David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo to your list, as long as they're still undefeated, which more than likely they will be. I just don't see them getting a lot of big fights, but we'll see all in all what happens. Or maybe Demetrius Andre could be in that mix as well. Because I've heard it's a possibility that David Benavidez versus Andre could happen. But we'll see what happens. It's not necessarily that I believe that Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez are bigger threats to Canelo than what Artur Beterbiev or Dmitry Bivol would be. It's just that it's about consistency of beating very, very decent contenders. And I think that Canelo, he's making a great move with Dmitry Bivol. But I would also like to eventually see the David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo fights if he eventually is going to make a top 10 or top 5, clawing his way up in the all-time great conversations, and maybe be in the same conversation with a Manny Pacquiao or a Muhammad Ali or Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Sugar Ray Robinson or Chavez Sr., Rocky Marciano, or whoever else you put there, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roy Jones Jr., Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, whoever else you put on that list, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, all those names that I just mentioned, and there may be a few others that I'm not mentioning, whoever you put up there, Canelo, in my view, if he defeats Bivol, Beterbiev, Charlo, Benavidez, and maybe also including Andre as well, and Makabu, if he ends up doing that, defeating most of those names, in my opinion, he will certainly have an argument as a top 10, boxer of all time. No doubt about it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So like I said, we'll see what happens. Sorry if my energy level wasn't as big in this video when it came down to it, but just overall a tiring day. Just had to do a lot of stuff today. But anyways, just thought that I would talk about the news, give my little breakdown. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I'll also be giving my Josh Taylor versus Jack Catterall fight review tomorrow, because I believe that fight ends up happening tomorrow. So check that out if you all want to. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.